The following is a conversation with Joe Nemelka of Nemelka Racing Pigeon Lofts. Joe is one of the top one-loft racers in the United States and also talks about his time flying at a club level and his process with his breeders. I really appreciate Joe's time, and I think you all are going to really enjoy this episode. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's been reaching out, commenting, liking the videos, and subscribing to the channel. It really does help. Thank you. All right, Joe Nemelka, thank you so much for coming on. I've been looking forward to this. You're definitely one of the most requested people that everybody in the audience wants to hear what you have to say, and really appreciate you coming on and passing on your knowledge. So thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and I will see if I have anything meaningful to say, but thanks, Joe.
But you were asking me before we got started here kind of why I did this, and it really goes back to, for me, my dad being a teacher. He started in the late 90s, early 2000s with a blog, and talking about his daily process, what he was doing with the birds, and so a lot of people were helped by that. So the modern day version of that is to put out YouTube videos and information, and so I really just decided, why don't I contact some of the top guys around the world and see if they'd be willing to come on and talk. And so that's kind of how it started. I didn't really have a plan, but it's been great.
Well, as I was saying to you before we got started too, I think it's just a great benefit to everybody. And I've watched them all, and I've learned some things, and I've already put into practice some things. You can never stop learning in this sport, and to be competitive, you have to keep trying to learn. And for the newbie, or for someone that's been in it like me for quite a while, I'm truly grateful to you and to all those that participated. So I don't know if there's anything I can do to help other than today, but please don't hesitate to ask. I just am truly grateful, Jeff, for what you've done, and I think it'll really enhance the sport.
Well, I appreciate that, Joe. I definitely have personally learned a lot too, and have applied some of that as well. And I think everybody willing to share information with each other is only going to help the sport, and it has to be that way, I think, for it to continue, because we all want it to continue. So
Sure.
But today we're going to talk about you and your history in the sport and your pigeons, and can't wait. So where did it begin for you, Joe? Where did this pigeon start for you?
Yeah, so if you ask my mom, it started when I was in diapers. I used to crawl out to my dad's pigeon coop, but obviously I don't remember that. And my dad got out of pigeons and got into horse racing, and I think what was it, 82? Actually, it would have been 81. In 1981, my mom probably was asking me to clean up our garage, and I found this box. And I opened it up, and there was pigeon, trophies and pedigrees and diplomas, and there was a book, my dad's old breeding book, and I just started looking through it, and there was this book called Pigeon Fly Home, and I decided to read the book, and I mean, literally, I think I consumed it in one day. It was a fascinating little novel. It's short, but it's really good. And I remember walking upstairs to my dad and said, I want to get into pigeons, and he was shocked, and he said, okay. And so he called some of his old buddies in the sport, and within that fall, actually 1982 was the first year I raced. So I had young birds in 82. So that's how I got in. It was literally just cleaning out a garage, finding a box, and it has been a lifetime pursuit of enjoyment for me and relationships, and so it's been good.
So you're in Utah now. Is that where you grew up and where your dad was flying at the time and all that?
I did, yeah. My dad was in Salt Lake, and he used to fly with the old Wings Club. And then we moved down here to Utah County, which is about an hour south. And I flew in the old UCA club, and then it evolved. The club split, and then the UVI club. So I flew in the UVI club. There were breaks in there. I went to graduate school in the Midwest in Kansas. Then I moved around with my job. Actually moved around the country: Indiana, Atlanta, Arkansas, London, England. I was there a few years, and then we moved back from London, England in 2002. And that's when I'm like, okay, I got to get back into birds. So when we moved back to Utah in 2002 is when I got back into pigeons.
Well, that's great. So when you got back into pigeons 2002, what was your strategy to get started? Because that's one of the questions I always ask, top guys like yourself. I ask for advice for new flyers, but what is it? What's your advice? What was your story on getting back going again? What was your strategy? How did you decide, okay, if I want to do it, this is how I need to do it?
Okay. Well, a couple of things. I'm going to separate, if you don't mind, Jim. I'm going to separate advice for new flyers from the way I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
There was
We'll do advice
similarities.
later. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, okay, good. So I never stopped taking the Racing Pigeon Bulletin, the Racing Pigeon News. I never stopped following race results. I actually took the Racing Pigeon World, British Homing World, actually magazines. You know, that were weeklies, and I used to consume those. I mean, that was how I got my pigeon fix, even though I never could race when we were moving around and work. So my goal was to keep up on what birds were flying well. And when we were in London, and there was a decision was made to move back to Utah, I told my wife, "Well, I'm gonna best birds in the world are in Europe." So I said, "I'm gonna start figuring out who some good flyers are over here in Europe." And so I started following the results. And at that time, Pete Rietvink and Pete Valk were flying the old Van Morsel Jansons, and they were dominating on the short races. And my thought at the time was, and I actually think it's a decent strategy, is I wanted really good homing instinct. I wanted those fast speed pigeons, you know, the Jansons. And so I decided to acquire those. Now, Luella, between the time I started learning about them and the time that I got them, Luella Pigeon World bought all of those Jansons from Burt Brasspenning, those Van Morsels from Burt Brasspenning. So I actually, living in England was great. I went and met with the Mazzarellas, and I went to Blackpool, and I bought 8 of those. I actually bought 8 of the top Van Morsel Jansons from Luella. And as an afterthought, and this is kind of relevant to the story, I thought, you know, Invincible Spirit. I don't know if you remember Invincible Spirit, the world's most expensive pigeon for a period of time, tremendous Barcelona pigeon.
Right.
I told Mark Mazzarella, I said, throw in a couple of those Invincible Spirit Ardens. And he says, well, how much you willing to spend? I said, I don't know, how much do they cost? He goes, well, everything from 100 euros or 100 pounds up to, you know, thousands of pounds. Like, 100 pounds. So just throwing a hen and a cock. So I hadn't even seen them, sight unseen. He threw them in, and so I ended up getting those in 2002, and that was my foundation. Those 10 birds were my foundation, and for the most part, you can still see them in most of my winners today. So that's how I started. I wanted sprint pigeons, threw in a little bit of long distance birds, trying to extend their endurance. And my desire was not one loft racing at the time. I only wanted a club race, and so I raced in club races from 2002 to 2012. And then my work changed, and so I started traveling more, and so then I moved more into the one loft game. That's how I started. So I hope that made sense. Did that answer your question?
No, yeah, it does. And I think 2002, you know, one-loft racing was still in its infancy as far as what, you know, compared to today, what it is.
Sure.
It's certainly much bigger now. But what, when you were flying back in 2002 to 2012, how are you liking those crosses flying at a club level to start out? Were you able to kind of get going right away with it? Were you running any sort of system with your birds?
Yeah, so young birds, I fly to the perch. So I was just flying my young birds to the perch, and I just mated them, you know, many different ways. Fortunately, I mean, I still only, I think 3 of the Van Morsel Jansons didn't work out, and the Arden cock didn't work out, but the Arden hen became super. And so I started, you know, you get 10 and you start whittling them down, you figure out which ones are good. So
Right.
I started doing okay. And then I started supplementing them with some other birds, some winners from some other friends and people, and some other strains, added a little bit of Gabby here and a little bit of Koopman there, and you know, just some of the bigger names at the time. And I started doing okay. And then took me a couple of years, but I learned my system better. And then I also learned which birds were better. And so as I did that, I started to perform better. And toward the end, I think I was very competitive, and did quite well. But in old birds, I always felt like widowhood was the best way to fly. So I flew straight widowhood. I usually had between 12 and 20, maybe 16 to 20, started with that number of widowhood cocks. With my work, I think it's it's an easier way to fly. If you got those widowhood cocks really humming, they'll fly at an hour. You lock them up and you're kind of done.
Yeah.
And you need to train them or pound them down the road, and you're not worrying about them being eggy or, you know, that you deal with the natural. So widowhood was always what I chose to fly on old birds and just to the perch and young birds.
And when you were racing, what kind of feeding were you doing? Anything with the details of your system with the feeding and grit mixture, stuff like that?
Sure. I mean, you always want to use great feed. You always want to use, you know, good, clean feed, good grit. I always wanted to make sure I had plenty of minerals. I fed light, heavy for the most part in young birds and old birds. Widowhoods, one of the problem you have is later in the season they stop eating, as you know, or others will know. Widowhood cocks, they just stop, and so you're trying to figure out how to get them to eat. So then you got to start changing things up. You know, I read a lot. I mean, there's so many good pigeon books, and there's so many good, especially now on the internet, you can go out there and find. And I was just following some of the latest, most successful fads, with there's not fads, you know, routines with respect to
Right.
taking food. So I did light heavy for the most part. Gannesses, I used Gannesses 1, 2, 3 and young birds for a period of time. Found that pretty helpful for young birds. Old birds, it didn't work quite as well. So, you know, I don't know if that answers your question, but I always focus on light, heavy, good quality
Yeah.
feed. When they come home, I'd give safflower, 100% safflower. I don't know if that's still in vogue, but that's what I would do, would be 100% safflower to get them built up again with the fats, the oils. And then I would go back to the light, heavy feed to get them back going and ready for the race.
And then when you decided in 2002 to get started again, what kind of loft were you building then? Have you changed it and adapted it since then, or you still have the same loft? I mean, how did that start for you?
I have the same loft. So when we first moved back from London, we didn't even have a house, so we were renting a place, and I built a loft at my parents' house, and so I just built a loft to house the breeders and raise young birds, and I didn't race out of that knowing we were building a house. But then we moved down to our current house, so I brought that loft down, and that became my widowhood loft, and I added a larger loft for my young birds and my breeders. And then I added another loft for individual breeding sections for later, probably like 6 years ago. If I had to do it all over again, I would do so many things different. I think
Yeah.
everybody says that.
Right.
I have learned so much, but functionally, the loft is good ventilation. I think it's clean. I like the way the waters work with keeping them off the floor. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of a hodgepodge now. I've put pictures on Facebook and stuff of the lofts. I mean, they're nice lofts, but oh, there's so many things I'd love to change.
Yeah, I think we all have that where we want to change things about the loft for sure.
Sure.
Um, so when you're busy, you're working and you only had time for your woodhood cocks, what was your morning routine that people can learn from that you were able to kind of keep it balanced with your work and racing schedule?
Okay, I'm going to back up to young birds. I'll start with young birds. So
Yeah,
one
that's
of the
good.
nice things about our club is we would train. And young birds, I think you got to train the young birds. I mean, that's my opinion. You got to pound them down the road.
Right.
And I think if you want to be successful in young birds, you need to train. So I'd work with our club. We'd haul the trailer down the road. So I'd be getting up early, taking them the night before, getting them on the trailer, and then they'd be off. And then you're just hoping they come home. I mean, electronic clocking has been amazing. You know, you can see when they come home and all the others. So I would always be hopeful that all would go well. I'd get home and then you'd have a bird with a broken leg, broken wing. It always made me feel bad from work, but what do you do? So
Yeah.
that was the plan. Get them on the truck, get them trained in young birds. Once you start, I mean, I don't know how detailed you want to get. I think young birds need 2 to 3 times a week of a good distance. If you're training them as the races get longer, 2 times a week, a little more rest. In widowhood's easy. I mean, I get up in the morning before, right as the sun's coming up, and I kick the birds out, and I sit out there and just watch them and make sure they're flying and lock. The nice thing about my loft is I could close everything else up. They could not see or know another pigeon was around, which I think is important for the widowers. They'd come down. Sometimes as you know, widower, they'll land, they'll pop their wings and take off. So then they'd fly and then they come in, I lock them up, close them up, and then I open up the rest of the pens for the birds, and then I head on to work and get in at a decent hour. So the morning, it was awesome. It was honestly something that I truly miss about flying. I mean, people often ask me if I like one-loft racing or club racing better. It's easy for me, club racing by far. I mean,
Right.
there's very few things. I jokingly say it's almost a spiritual experience when you're training these birds, pounding them down the road, and you're sitting there in race day and you're seeing the birds come through the club, and you're like, okay, if I can get one within this time frame, then all of a sudden you see a bird setting their wing. I mean, I don't know about you, Jeff, but that nothing is better in the world than that effort, work, and then seeing the proof of that come when they come good on a race day in the clubs.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's an incredible feeling to see your work pay off with, the birds. It's a good, you're kind of feeling sync with the animal, the
Yeah,
work you
no,
put
and you
into
get
yeah.
yeah, and you get to know them so well. I mean, you start
Mhm.
to know their personality so well when you're training them and seeing them every day, and who's a little bit annoying, who's tough, who's
Right.
same thing with people. They have different personalities. Yeah, I love it.
When you were saying young birds, you took them down the road 2 to 3 times a week, depending on the distance. What distance were you training?
So I feel like my what I've always used is 50 miles is a good toss. So if I felt like they needed to get more, I'd take them 70. If I felt like I needed a little bit less, I'd take them 30. So that was the range. So my standard was always they need to go 50 miles. Now it's interesting. I sent some birds to Richie Zidane in New Jersey, Central Jersey Concourse, tremendous flyer, and he raced them in a couple of the futurity races out there. And I call him, and he's taking him 100 miles 3 times a week. You know, and I know that the Jersey guys, they really train hard, and he did tremendous. So that was my theory, and you probably know this, or everyone knows this. There's so many theories. Find what works and makes sense for you, and then you find that success at it. But my theory was a 50-mile toss is a good standard toss, depending upon their workload, extend it a little bit or shorten it a little bit to hit the right mark. With respect to, you know, if it's a 100-mile race, I can take them 70 and not have much of an impact. If it's a tough 350 coming up and I take them 70 miles, I may be drawing on those reserves they need to finish and compete in that race.
Yeah, it's true. It does kind of depend on where you're located and what is coming up distance wise and what conditions they'll be in, tailwind versus headwind and so on and so forth. So
Exactly.
it is important to have some trial and error, kind of figure out what's working.
Yeah.
But it is,
I would, and I
yeah,
would ask you and your dad. I mean, your dad was somebody I used to read. You know, he's a legend. I mean, he's an amazing pigeon guy that's been around a long time. That's
thank you.
truly done and seen it all. And so I would lean on stuff that they would share as far as those experiences over the many years that they've competed. You and him have competed. So again, as you say, it's just trial and error, and then find what works for you.
Right, exactly. So your name is synonymous with one-loft success. So let's dive into post 2012. Your time wasn't able to be dedicated to racing anymore personally. Is that what happened? And then
Yep.
you thought, okay, I'm at least going to do one lofts to scratch that itch. Is that how it kind of started?
And this ties into, you know, if somebody's asking me for advice as once again a pigeon, one of the first things I'm going to say is, you know, what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? You know, and so for me, I like pigeons to compete, and this is important. I probably wouldn't have pigeons if I didn't compete. You know, some people just love the birds, and when I started as a young boy, I loved the birds. I'd have had pigeons whether I raced them or not. At this stage of my life, I have pigeons to scratch, as you say, that competitive itch. I played sports all through high school and actually a little bit past high school. And so I always felt competition's been something that, and I was raised with a family of 7 kids, 3 brothers. We always were beating up on each other, competing. And so I just needed to scratch that competitive itch. And when I realized I couldn't race in the club anymore, and I actually started racing, I don't know, 2005, 6, probably in a couple little one-loft races, CBS's and a few
Right.
others. And I said, if I'm gonna do it, I got to compete in the one-loft game. So I pivoted a lot of thoughts and invest more and try to understood and more and learn more. But that's what happened. So I just realized if I enjoy the competition, I enjoy the birds, I enjoy the camaraderie with a lot of people around the country and actually now around the world. I got to figure out this one-loft game, and that's what happened. So that was the pivot that happened. So I dabbled in it prior to 2012, and after 2012, it's like, if I'm going to have these loft and these pigeons, I better really figure this game out.
So what was the big transition for you between between a club pigeon that would have success in the club versus a one-loft pigeon? Did you find there was a difference in the way you had to breed? Did you have to bring in new birds to adjust your strategy? How did you have to make some adjustments to kind of transition from club to one-loft?
That's a huge question. So I'm going to break it down. So on the birds. So with respect to the birds, I felt like I had good pigeons, and I think good at that time. And I was winning all the club awards. I had, you know, Superstitious was a tremendous racing pigeon, 6 times first, club champion bird, national ace pigeon. So I knew I had some good pigeons. And some of these pigeons, like I said, I dabbled in one-loft races and done okay. Hadn't really done super, but done okay. So I felt like I just needed to continue to evaluate the quality of pigeons that I have. And I know there's people that say one-loft birds are one-loft birds, club birds are club birds. My opinion is good birds are good birds. I mean, a guy in our local club flies mostly my pigeons, and I would carefully say he's probably the best flyer in the club. His name's Wayne Whiteley. Very competitive, and you'll see him on, you know, Ryan Jones post sheets, and you'll see Wayne Whiteley on a lot of the sheets because he flies in that concourse, and those are principally my pigeons. So again, I'm seeing him win in clubs, and I'm seeing him win in one-loft races. So I haven't had to pivot much on the pigeon, but I've had to pivot a lot in how I care for them and think about them, because I only have them when they're young birds for 40 days, 45
Right.
days, you know,
Right.
so for me, it's like, okay, I got to make sure everything is spotless. I mean, they're really healthy. They're real. The conformation is right. the genetics are right to be able to compete. I think in club racing, you can stretch the quality of a pigeon beyond their genetics, because if you're a really good handler, you can really draw some great results out of them. In club race, or excuse me, one-loft racing, they got to have that genetic makeup and that the capacity based on the health when you had them perform. And if not, I think you're going to struggle.
What was your routine, or what was your system, I should say, with your breeders leading up to breeding season? Were you medicating any certain way, vaccinating, getting them ready to pair up? Because you're obviously trying to decide, okay, I want to fly this one loft through this one loft. You know, you have your, I'm sure you have a schedule on when you need to send out your birds. And so what's the plan look like for you, if you don't mind sharing?
No, I'll share anything. That's one thing, Jeff, that you can't. I will share anything. I'll tell you my worst event things that I've tried, and as well as the things that I currently do. I want people. I mean, one of the things too. I think you talked about this beginning. In order for the sport to grow, I think we need to share. We need to help people find success, because if you're going to consistently be on the bottom of the sheets, I think you're going to quit the sport. So
Right.
I think we should give away some of our best pigeons to the new flyers, and I think we need to give them all the advice that we can to help. Now, at the end of the day, they got to heed that and do it. I mean, there's been some people I've talked to, and then I go to their loft. I'm like, man, are you even watering or feeding these pigeons? You're not going to have a chance, you know?
Right.
But so at the end of the day, it's up to them. But getting to your point, the breeders, I've changed so many times over the years. I'd say the last 5 years, I've got a pretty consistent system. I do hit them with, effectively Baytril, the enrofloxacin, about a month before. I vaccinate my breeders every year about a month before. I don't medicate heavy, but I'm not one of these anti-medicators. So I hit them with enrofloxacin, I vaccinate them, I then give them a canker pill, and then I think they're ready if all's looking well. If they're not quite where I want them, and you can tell, I mean, you can tell if they're feeling great or if they're a little down, and then you got to start figuring some other things out. Then I made them up. And then during the breeding season, the only thing I really hit them with is I give them a canker medicine about every 3 weeks as it starts to get warmer. I think canker is something that we all struggle with during breeding season, at least I do. And I think if people tell us they're not, I think they're probably not being totally honest.
Right.
Pigeons carry canker. It's in their systems, and the goal is to keep them shedding it fewer times to their youngsters and others. And so I hit them with canker about every three to 4 weeks during the breeding season. But that's it. Now, if I was racing, just real quick, if I was racing, I think it takes a little more medication. I know Frank McLaughlin, great friend, somebody I respect more than about anybody in the sport. Well, he's been able to find a system that works for him with minimal medication and minimal,
Right.
and he does well, and the results speak for themselves.
Right.
For others, I think it takes a little bit more. You got to worry about respiratory, you got to worry more about cocks, you got to worry about worms, more because the birds are out in the grass or whatever. I just think when you're racing, I think it takes a lot more than I currently do with my breeders, because my birds aren't out. My birds are on raced floors. They're not the coxy eggs and the worm eggs. They're not getting exposed to those things again. So I took them. I used to take all the droppings and everything to the vet. I still get them swabbed periodically for canker and to know the type of issues I'm dealing with. But he's like, you're not going to have these issues because you're raised on raised floors and they don't go outside.
Yeah. And what vaccines are you going to be giving them before breeding season? I know that's a question a lot of people have for me, is what vaccines do you prioritize? Because there are several to choose from.
Yeah, great question. So enrofloxacin is really helps them against paratyphoid, right? So I don't worry about vaccinating my breeders for paratyphoid, because that's the principle of enrofloxacin. It's going to knock that salmonella down. I do worry about PMV, and I use whatever good vaccine I can get. Most of the time it's from Europe. And I got a couple different places I go and get it. Right now it's the PMV with Roto.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the one that I'm currently using, but it depends what I can get. As long as it's a good vaccine that I can get from a reliable source, that I assume it hasn't been warm, it hasn't, it's been kept chilled and all the other stuff, then I'm comfortable with it.
Yeah, I've used the Rhoda PNV as well the past couple of years, and it's awesome.
Yeah, I think so too. That's the one that I'm really content with it. It's just sometimes hard to get it when I need it.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah,
actually had a friend of mine get some from a guy down in Texas that had too much and didn't need it. So I was able to get a couple extra that I needed. Sometimes it's competitive to find them.
it is. That's
Sure.
good. No, again, that's what I use. I'm usually reaching out to a couple people. Hey, you got any PMV roto? If you're going to get
Yeah.
some, you get some to me. And I usually trying to figure out where to get it.
What about products? Are you using any products on the feed, products in the water to boost your breeders during the process?
Great question. No, because again, I travel a lot, unfortunately, with work right now. My wife and kids, well, my kids, now my wife, and boy, that's a blessing to have a wife that's supportive.
Right.
You keep it easy. People don't believe me when I say this. My wife can feed the pigeons in 5 minutes. Now it takes me an hour, and she always tries to understand why it takes me an hour and her 5 minutes. But any pigeon guy knows when you're feeding them, it's you're looking, observing, trying to see what's next. But yeah, I don't. She's not going to put any stuff in the water or on the feed. So for me, clean water. Other than that time when I'll do some canker, and that's when usually when I do it is when I'm home, so that I'm doing that, not her. And I don't put anything on the feed. And I give them a lot of minerals. I use 4 to 5 different mineral sources. You know, pick stones, 2 or 3 different grits. I don't use Jovati or the all-in-ones. I think those are tremendous, but I think the birds like the seeds and other things in them and don't
Right.
always get the minerals that they need. That's my own preference.
Right.
I know, again, as you know, Jeff, people use that and do really well. You know, like I use Jovati all-in-one. I'm like, okay, use those. For me, what I just use different true mineral grits and allow them to pick around in that.
So you kind of have a custom mixture you put several things together for.
Oh, I've got 3 different pick stones, one and 2 different grits that I'm usually mixing together. And I keep them in separate. The stones I keep in separate grit feeders from the actual grit that's already broken up, because the pick stones, I don't want them knocking around the grit while they're picking on the pick stones. And you know how pigeons, they'll knock stuff around and then waste it. So I'm trying to
Waste it.
be as efficient as I can.
Yeah,
So
I love pickstone as well. It's something I always keep around for the birds is pickstone because it's something that they really need and uh, that's kind of a natural thing for a pigeon and their instincts is to pick at stuff like they would on the ground out in
yeah,
the wild. So it gives them
exactly.
that activity too.
Exactly.
So when you're getting your youngsters in the nest and they're getting close to weaning, what's the process from there? Some people like to vaccinate in the nest. Some people vaccinate when they wean or wait a little bit later. What's your process for the youngsters when it's ready to wean and you're starting to aim for them to go to a one loft?
Yeah, so I'm going to work backwards. So I typically like to send the young birds out when they're, 45 days, around 45, maybe, days old. I send them out a little older maybe than some others, but I'm hearing that's becoming more prevalent. I think the one loft managers appreciate that. They don't want to be dealing with youngsters that don't know how to eat and drink. So I'm assuming at that stage that they are truly eating and drinking on their own, and I move them out. So that's the target. So working back from that, when they're about 23 days, 24 days is when I vaccinate them. Okay, a few days after that, I move them to the floor. Now I've only got one. Well, now I got one cock that'll go beat up some youngsters, so I'm always careful in that loft. But I like to get them on the floor. I like to have them with the group. I don't care if they're getting fed by multiple bird parents. I actually think that potentially helps build their immunity, or their,
Right.
and they're getting different things from different birds.
That makes sense.
Then once they're fully feathered under the wing, I move them over to their individual pen and I watch them, make sure they're eating and drinking well. When I move them over, I give them a canker pill. So they get a canker pill. And so I may have just hit them with canker in their breeding loft. Sometimes I worry, am I giving them too much? Because depending upon the cycle of when I'm weaning and versus when I'm giving them the canker medicine in the water, they may get too much. I haven't seen any issues. So then I move them over to the loft. I do think, just my thoughts, common sense, right? Use some common sense. I think if you vaccinate them too close to shipping them, what is a vaccination? A vaccination's goal is to make the pigeons' immunity kick in and make them sick so that their immunity does kick in. So I think if you're vaccinating them too close to shipping them, my opinion is I think you could be doing them a disservice because shipping's stressful enough. If you have them vaccinated where they're feeling a little down, I don't know about your birds, Jeff, but when I vaccinate my birds, they're dumpy for a day or two after, kind of sitting there looking a little bit stressed out. So I want to make sure that they're fully through that and then they're ready to put in a box and healthy, content, eating well, and ship them.
Yeah, I do the same. I try to vaccinate to where by the time they get to the one loft race, they're able to get their booster and at times correctly. Uh,
Perfect.
that's
Yep.
that's how I personally do it, and I just think for me it makes sense just logically to have them on system. One thing I'm going to ask you about, what canker pills are you giving? Because I know someone's going to ask that down below in the comments. So
Yeah, great question. I use pretty much what I can get, and I'm trying to think. I've used the Spartrix pill mostly. If I get the Spartrix, I use that. And right now, oh, I have to look. It's I can't remember, but I know it's one of the common pills for the common canker medicine. So I can respond in a comment to somebody and give them the
perfect.
exact one that I use. I can actually describe it. It's in a little white canister about this tall. It's got the blue label. I think I got it from Jed's.
Jed's.
Um, yeah, so I can't remember which one it is, but it's from Europe. It's a pill from Europe.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. And so the youngsters, once you give them their own, they're eating, they're drinking on the floor, you're watching them, then you transfer them to their own section. You continue to make sure they're okay. They're handling the vaccination and everything. Are they getting access to as much food as they want, much grit as they want? Are you only doing it certain times a day? What are you doing from that regard to get them ready?
Yeah, I may do something a little bit unique there. So that's an interesting that you would ask that. So when I move them over, I want to make sure they're cleaning up everything. So they have as much feed as they want, but if they don't eat the corn or the peas or something like that, they're eating the little grains, youngsters often do,
Right.
then I just leave it in there. And I kind of like, hey, you got to finish it before I'm going to give you anything else. And a lot of times they finish it, and since I have graded floors, they'll eat it and it falls down, and but they're trying. And then I'll put more feed in. So I'm not just pouring the feed to them. So I'm making sure they're pretty much cleaning up what I give them. And I don't know if that's unique. Maybe everybody does that, but all you can eat to these youngsters, I think they start to focus in on certain grains. And I want them to I don't know what the one-loft they're sending them to. They're using small popcorn or big whole corn. What are they using? I don't know. But I want to make sure they at least know how to eat to get the nutritional value out of all those different types of grains that the one-loft's using. So I may be a little more strict on that. I mean, I don't do it day one where it's like, they're just trying to figure it out. But over that 10 to 15 days that they're sitting in that individual pen, there's times when I go in there and the feeder's totally empty and I'm like, all right, they learned how to eat everything. Cool. So
No, yeah.
grit they have in front of them all the time, and fresh water they have in front of them all the time too.
Yeah, I'm the same way as you. I want them to clean up what they have, and they will tend to develop a habit of skipping the bigger grains. That's something my dad taught me early on is, watch your youngsters on if they're just eating small grains and they continue to do that, it's not a good sign. It's
Oh,
you want them to eat the big grains and to finish. And then the only time I may have a little bit of an exception would be like a day of shipping. If I'm going to send them, I want to make sure and get them fed up good, whatever they want, if I'm going to send them in the mail. But yeah, otherwise, I do the same thing.
I ship today. You go in my young bird loft today, there's probably feed in there that deep
Yeah,
because I want them to get a little bit more.
right.
So well said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll tell you a sign that I look for when I know I got them right is there's a couple grains left, and I go in and throw the feed in there, and those youngsters come down and eat and clean up, not all of it, but most of it. Then I'm like, okay, I got them right. And they're also learning to think food is important. I need to get down and eat food when they're throwing it.
Yeah.
Sometimes the youngsters, they get dumb. I don't know if the right word is, where they just think, okay, I can eat whenever I want. Well, in a one loft race, they start to train them and manage them. And sometimes I think those youngsters may be a little bit set back if they don't really understand the value of feed, and that when it's thrown down, come down and eat it.
That makes total sense. Yeah, if they have the expectation that I can eat anytime I'm ready, then
Yeah,
they're going to get left behind, especially at a one-loft race where, they're having to get in there and compete. But if your birds are, the moment you pour it, are ready to come down and compete and eat quickly, they're going to take that on to the one-loft, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I like the way you explained that. That's the principle that I was saying, exactly what you shared. Thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like that a lot. So anything else covering on the young birds and what you do before shipping that we missed? Do you worm them, anything like that?
I don't. Again, the vets have told me I'm just not going to have worms because worms, they got to they go in the mouth and out, when they're passing, when they're passing, they pass those eggs out through themselves, and that's how the worms stay cycling through the pigeons. And since my droppings fall through, I've taken the droppings to the vet, and they say you don't have any worm issues, so I don't. But if the pigeons were outside or they're on the ground, I would worm because that's how they pick up those worm eggs. I'll just say this, and I know others have emphasized it. I think it's critical that you put as much time, energy, and effort into the box and the bottom of dressings in the box that the birds are going to be sitting in. as anything. I mean, you're sending them there, and if you put them in a box that's really gross, or no shavings or something else, and I know people have shavings with minimal dust. I've kind of got this little concoction I use between a couple different things that I mix to put in the bottom of the box that I think helps with the absorbency, and it also helps them have stability. I mean, you put a pigeon in the box and you don't put anything in it, you can go like this and you hear them slide, you go like this, you hear them slide, and then you pull them out and they're just full of crap all over them. It's terrible. So put the time and effort into shipping as much as you put into raising them.
Yeah, Jim Ward, when I had him on, was talking about, one-loft managers, when they open a box, they're paying attention to those things to see, because they can tell right away if a bird's just already not going to be in it just from the stress of the trip. And that bedding really is important. That is a unique point to bring up to people, is the bedding is important. I didn't think about that, but I do as well. Put plenty. I use pine needles, and I really give it a really good thick bedding, just like you're talking about. I want it to be a comfortable ride for them, and
exactly,
it makes a lot of sense.
No, and I saw that when Jim said that, and I've known it for years, but I also know, hearing it from people like Jim that take in hundreds and hundreds of boxes, and they know the quality of the pigeon and the care just simply based on how they look when they pull them out of the box.
Yeah. Let's transition into your stars of your loft. So you've got your one loft racing team started. What was your kind of first big win that you kind of found your pigeon that you can build around, that was kind of the beginning of what you have today as far as all your success in the one loft game?
Well, I had a pair. It was Klein, as a son of Klein Lichte, which is a famous Van Morsel racing pigeon. And then the Arden hen, this Arden hen that I told you about, that the guy that Mark Mazzarella threw in for $100.
Mm-hmm.
I paired them together, and they started hitting the club races, champion ace pigeons and all this. And then I started sending them to one loft races, and they started hitting. In fact, 2011, I was in South Africa. Frank McLaughlin encouraged me to send a couple birds, and so I sent some birds to South Africa. It was a typical South Africa tough final. I'm sitting there, and I had no expectations, but I did send one youngster off that pair, 32nd, 12th in the averages. And so again, that's when I knew, okay, I got a pigeon that can compete, or a pair that can compete. So then I really focused on that, the Super Klein Lichte and the Arden hen and their children. And again, they were, like I said, ace champion birds. I took their children, or breeding out of them, and Klein Champion is one of their children, and he's the sire of the Arden 2 hen when he was mated to his mother, and the Arden 2's been a key breeder for me in the one loft races. So that core family down from Super Klein Lichte and the Arden hen were really where I was like, okay, I got something here that can really compete in the one loft races. And then I added this cock called Florian. He's actually a gift. So Florian, I bought some birds from Florian Hendricks. I'm going to make a point here real quick.
Sure.
People say, where did you get these? I did my research. I did a ton of research. And Florian Hendrick, he's always raced well, but I was like, but he wasn't that well known. And I noticed he flew a small team, and he competed in what I think are the key distances in the Netherlands of 250 to 450 miles. And I thought, that's a guy that's got the gene pool, the know-how, the quality pigeon. So I reached out to him. I said, and I was looking at the results on websites, and said, hey, Florian, love to buy some birds. And so he said, sure, I bought some birds. And I brought them over, and 2 of them died in import. And Florian's like, hey, sorry, I'll give you a gift. So that was Florian. And so Florian was a gift. He said, I think he's really good. And, and then I put him in the loft, and just like everything, it's kind of like, well, prove yourself. And the first year he bred a winner, and second year he bred a couple winners. And the third, actually was the second year, 2015, where I had him mated to the Arden 2 hen, and they had 2 birds that were super in the AIC race. They had a bird that was super in the coast to coast with Richie Zidane, and in the concourse, Central Jersey concourse. And I'm like, man, I'm onto something. 2016, a bird scored in the California Classic. And so I knew I had something special with Florian and the Arden 2, but then I just kept, that's really still the core. And then I've supplemented with little birds here and there, but that's my core. Did that answer your question, Jeff? I don't know.
Yeah,
if
absolutely. That's great.
A lot of research and a little bit of luck was kind of how I came into those different pigeons.
No, I tell people all the time that, the more you can dive in and understand what a pedigree is, and what a pedigree means, and study results. And as you said, you went and looked for what you had value in on distances, and you found somebody that wasn't quite as famous. And that's another thing I tell people is, you can really got to be careful getting caught up in the popular names. It's not that the popular names aren't going to have great pigeons out there. They are, but some people will take advantage of the popular names and push out stuff that may not be as close or as good as what the original popular name was. But when you do that research and you find somebody who might not be so famous, but has those super birds, you can find a piece of gold, just like you did with Florian.
Oh yeah, well, and exactly. And now Florian is one of the biggest names in Europe. I mean, he sells birds all over the world, and his birds go for a lot more.
Sure.
But what you just said, Jeff, I think when you say, what is my advice to new flyers? I would almost say exactly what you just said. Do your research, and I would qualify by saying, what do you want to accomplish in the sport? So, I mean, if you want to win competitively, I would learn from the big names, watch the big names, but I would really do some research and find people that you can find high quality pigeons that are probably less expensive, because you're going to make more mistakes and you're not going to allow the pigeons to manifest their quality. So as you're working toward that end goal, what is that end goal? If you want to sell pigeons, you got to have the big names, I think.
Right.
Unfortunately, but if you want to compete and win, I don't think it takes the big names. I mean, I certainly went out and did my research, and that's what I actually find as fun is. It is part of the enjoyment of the sport for me, is finding those no names before they become big names. Chris DeBacher, I started buying from him in 2012, 13, 14. Now he's one of the biggest names.
Right.
Josh Goosen, another guy that flies 12 to 14 old birds, wins first NPO. He's now becoming a big name and is aligned with Pippa. I found those guys because I did some research.
Exactly.
And if you do the research and the results, and not based on the marketing websites or the auction websites or on Facebook, you can find guys that can develop great friendships with them and get some high quality pigeons for less. That'll give you a chance to succeed. So I'm basically saying very similar to what you said.
Yeah, and I don't mean to knock any of the big names or anything like that. I just mean to say that, there are tons of options at every budget. And a lot of people say, well, it's too expensive to get these types of top quality pigeons. And I just think there's a lot of options. And as you said, the more research and awareness you have of what's working around the world, the more, you'll be able to find those opportunities. And I think that what you were able to do was forward thinking and having a vision of what you wanted and seeing opportunities before they really are to the masses, or, to where everybody else is aware. And that to me is a gift for sure. I think that's,
well, it took a lot of work.
special.
Thank you. It was a lot of work too. I mean, you got to go out there and spend time looking at the websites, but just to your point, I'm not knocking the big names. They're big names for a reason.
Absolutely.
I mean, they've accomplished some significant things. They have a right to have some of those names.
Right.
Those guys that are big names, they deserve to be there. Now, to your point, if you're trying to find success, is that where you have to go? I don't think so.
Right.
But if you go there, you got a good shot of being competitive if you do your research into what you're buying. But it's like, hey, I'm going to call Ganis. I want a son of Wolverine. I want a son of Mix. Or something. That's where, if you want those, you got a high percentage of doing well, but you're going to pay for it.
Right.
Yeah. Do you have a higher percentage of finding great success? Or do you have just as good a percentage of finding great success if you go on the national database and start looking up some of the really good flyers that are really dominating some of the clubs? You might. So, and you're going to get that one for significantly less because they're not some of the bigger names. So it just depends what you're trying to accomplish. But yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Do your research, plan where you want to end up, and plan a road to get there. And you can get there without spending a lot of money, or you can get there by spending a lot of money. And I'm not saying one's right or wrong. I'm just saying pick your path.
Yeah, there's multiple pathways to get there, and guys like Ganis have certainly earned the right to, do their birds how they want to do them. And he, like you, has been a visionary on how to adapt to the sport and seeing opportunities, and certainly, has some of the best birds in the world as well.
For sure, but again, to your point, he has a model.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows it so well. He knows exactly what he's doing. He knows the bird he's looking for. He knows how he's going to prove them out. He knows how he's going to mate them. He knows pigeons. Mike Ganis knows pigeons. So don't think he's just somebody that's spending big money to buy the winner. He knows what he's doing, and so he's found success. I applaud him. I mean, somebody that's been able to do extremely well and make it a profession, I provide him. Do I want to choose to buy pigeons from Mike? Mike already knows that I don't. Mike and I have talked about it, because I want to compete with him through
Right.
my path, through my
Right.
model. And we have mutual respect for each other, and wish each other well, and compliment each other when we win. He sends me a text or an email, and I send him a text or an email.
Right.
But that's what the sport's about.
Yeah. That's the fun part. And, Mike would be the first to tell you he's super competitive as well. And I think that's
He
something we
is,
all share, the guys that have a lot of success is, a real drive for the competition side of things. So that's
for
one of the
sure.
funnest parts.
For
Uh,
sure.
what is your kind of pigeon? Do you have a type of pigeon that you like if you're visiting a loft or you're at an auction or you're trying to acquire something new? Do you have something in the hand that you like? Is it a combination of things that you're looking for? What's your strategy there?
Sure. I think all of us that have been in the pigeon game a long time know what a good pigeon handles like. I think we do. We know the conformation. We know when we're handling, we know what to look for in the wings and the steps, and we know what to look for in the vents, and we know what to look for with respect to, I call it carved out of one block of wood. It feels like it was, carved perfectly in the way that the breast flows out to the tail, the one pin tail. I think it can be, it's nice, but I actually don't mind it if the tail's a little wider. In fact, I've got some of my old Ardens, their tails used to be a little bit wide when I would hold
Mhm.
them, and they raced as well as anything. So I certainly have that body type and conformation that I've learned over the 40 years that I've been in the sport that I really like. Having said that, I've also learned anything can win. Anything can win. I should say anything. Most things can. There's
Right.
certain what I call defects that are fatal defects. A pigeon that has an extremely weak back or has some other fatal flaws, I don't think they got much of a chance. But if they're within the realm of certain conformation, I think they can win. I got my bird back from the blue bucket. I remember sending her out thinking, man, should I even send this one out? She's very narrow, which comes from some of the Gabby stuff. And Gabby's, I love Rick Martis's interview where he said he bought the Gabby pigeons but couldn't sell them because they handled so poorly, but they win. So she's predominantly Gabby, and she handles like a predominantly Gabby ugly pigeon. First pigeon in the blue bucket.
Right.
First stage pigeon in the Crooked River was not one of my favorites. Certainly not as bad as the handling as the one in the blue bucket, but not one of my favorites. So I've learned that good pigeons, the results speak for themselves. But yeah, I love a certain type of conformation. When I handle a really nice pigeon, you probably know this, Jeff. It's like, wow, what an awesome pigeon.
Right.
What's as important for me to that is what is it raced, what is it bred, what has its parents done? Then I get even more excited. But we all like really nice pigeons in the hand.
We do, and I think one of the things that is becoming more and more apparent for me is that you can't in your hands feel what a pigeon's homing ability is and their brain and what type of drive and heart that they have. So it's something that can only be shown to you in the basket, and it's once you get a pigeon like a blue bucket ace pigeon, the average speed winner, or a bird that has multiple firsts and a one loft. What do you do when you get those birds back? What's your plan of attack when you get one of those really special ones?
Um, one of the, and I say this carefully, one of the challenges I have is I keep a few breeders. So, I mean, like I sold the first Crooked River Ace pigeon. I probably would have liked to get it back. I donated, I don't know if any of you remember, like I put for the grain belt, I put an auction on there. You get to pick the first a bird from the Crooked River. And it just so happened I was first ace pigeon in the Crooked River. And the guy that won the auction's like, I'm going to take it. So I was disappointed I didn't get it back. I did the same thing in the blue bucket, but the blue bucket bird ended up being the hen, and the guy that won the auction wanted a cock. So I was like grateful I got it back. But the bird that he picked, I think was fourth or fifth. I can't remember what 30-25 finished, but also really high in the average. And so he picked the cock. I got to keep the hen. But the goal for me is, to speaking about the conformation, I want to put that pigeon with somebody physically that complements them. So she came back a little leaner than I thought, a little longer than I like, a little leaner and longer than I like. So I put her with Florian. Florian's a big barrel-chested pigeon. So I'm going to try to complement from a conformation standpoint, her with him. He throws very nice handling pigeons. And I also know he's a super breeder, and I know she was a super racer. So I'm increasing my odds there of having some success. So I look at the conformation, I try to work him into my family and try to find that success. I have the first ace pigeon in the 2017 California Classic. She's a super handling pigeon. She's bred okay. hasn't bred super, but she's bred okay. And so I'm always trying to complement who I mate her to help magnify her strengths and minimize any weaknesses in the mating. So that's the way I do it.
And what do you think about horses for courses, pigeons for races? As far as, if you get a hen that does, or you get a pigeon that does well at a certain race, do you tend to send siblings back to that race, or youngsters out of that bird that did well? Do you believe in any of that?
I believe in a little bit of it, not as much as probably some other people. And some people say, "Oh, Nemelka, he does really well in the California Classic with those Florian birds." Well, Florian's won the Blue Bucket, Florian's won the Crooked River, Florian's won in Orlando, Florian's won in Big Andes. I mean, they've dashed for cash. Florian's won in Cuevas. So I found they've won all over. And so I think good pigeons will race and compete anywhere. I do. Yeah, why not? I mean, if the siblings did well, and I got siblings, I'm going to send them to the same race. Just again, some common sense, right? But I still think good birds are good birds, and I send birds, to all the races out of my same pairs. So I don't think I quite finished the answer before. I sell most of my birds that win because I don't have many breeding spots available. I'm not going to replace their parents, I mean, so a lot of times I've done well and been fortunate to have quite a few money winners. And so typically I'm only bringing back one or two of them, and the rest of them I sell or give to some club auctions or something to try to benefit the sport. So that's how I bring them back.
So because you have a certain number of breeding spots, it's very, very competitive to get into one of those spots. So it has to be extra special in order to get in there. And if a bird's getting in there, it has to be extra special that you'll build around for the future. To get in there, it's competitive to be in there.
There's got to be okay. Two points. That great question. So first of all, I always try to bring in something new every year. Okay, totally unrelated to my family. So I'll try to bring in something new, and I've actually done that with some joint breedings. Like Geert Kolvenbag and we've shared birds because I know Geert's a super racer, right? So I'm like, send me a bird. So we've done some joint breedings. And I'll do a joint breeding. I try to do one joint breeding every year. I've done one with Ken Christopher, Andy Waclaw, Geert. And next year I'm doing it with an import bird from Corey Carlson. He got this Josh Goosen, daughter of Fromy. So Fromy is a super breeder, super raiser for John. So I'll try to find something that I can bring in, and then maybe bring in one that I buy or whatever myself. So try to bring in one or two birds. So that means I'm eliminating one or two, and then I try to eliminate one or two other birds, and then I'll bring back from the race one or other two. Because I think you always got to be trying something new, and I always think you need to continue to eliminate some of those that haven't performed. So that's the approach that I take. But I think it's pretty competitive. Yeah, I mean, I've got some pumpers that have, one of them was, 36, this one won 36,000 at pumping birds. Why? Because it hasn't bred anything and I can't quite give it up.
Right.
So, yeah, but it's tough. It's tough to find a good spot or find a spot in my loft.
Yeah. Do you find that you have certain birds that race extremely well, but their youngsters just don't seem to have that ability? I've had that as well. I sometimes have luck breeding out of them and it's skipping a generation to the next round. But even that sometimes can be tough. Have you found that as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's like, I'll bring a bird back that wasn't a great racer, but there's something about that pigeon or something about its parentage. Maybe its mother's getting old, or maybe the cock didn't fertile any eggs. I'm like, I got to keep that gene pool. And I'll think, I'll give it a shot. And it's like, holy cow, that thing produced. So yeah, absolutely. And I think on the flip side, the pigeons that do superior, sometimes you bring them back. Like I talked about the first ace pigeon in the California Classic, she has bred some super pigeons, but she's bred some very average pigeons as well. And as a percentage, I think she's an okay breeder. She's not going anywhere. She breeds good birds. But I'm looking for those super birds and those that consistently produce a higher percentage of winners. And so she's not going anywhere. She's staying in my loft, but it's just interesting to see that, it sounds like you've got the same experience.
Yeah, I have. And sometimes it takes finding the right mate. But one of the best hens I ever had that's still dominant in my pedigrees that are winning for me, her parents, neither one of them could breed anything. But when I put them together, they bred her, and she won 4 firsts, and her children have won firsts, but none of her siblings ever did anything. So it was just her that was the one. So the parents haven't bred anything other than her, but she was the one. And so once you find a bird like that, you have to cherish it because it's not easy and it's very rare.
There, well said. It is. Good pigeons are so hard to find.
Hmm.
I mean, I see these people that are like, have breeders or posting or talking about a pigeon, super breeder, super breeder, super breeder. And I just think, man, I must suck because I have very few super breeders. I have some super breeders for sure that I think are super breeders, but I don't have very many of them. And I can count them on one hand. I have some consistent breeders like that. I keep referencing that first California Classic Ace pigeon. She's a consistent breeder, but not a super breeder. And I just think they are so rare. And to your point, Jeff, when you get them, boy, cherish them. I dread the day that Florian doesn't fill eggs. He's filled every egg this year. I'm knocking on wood, but because I don't know if I got another one, the DeBacher cock, that's doing really well, who maybe quote his replacement, but man, I may never get another one like him. That's just
What
reality.
what's his year? What year is Florian?
2013, so he's 11 years old this year,
Yeah,
yeah, every year I'm like, okay, is this the year? But he's filled every egg.
that's
So
great. And do you pump his youngsters?
I do, I
Yeah,
do. He hasn't raised a baby in probably 5 years. So yeah, so I probably get 16 to 20 youngsters off of him every year. 3 or 4 money winners off of him every year. I race them. People are like, why are you racing them? I'm like, because I breed to race. I don't breed to
yeah.
sell. I breed to race, and he's someone I can count on every year, breeding me a couple, at least 3 or 4 money winners. So yeah.
Well, our top cock here is a bird called Kohan Luke. He was a National Hall of Fame pigeon, and he's bred me a lot of great pigeons. But he's a 2009, and he's still sfertling today. So I think
Give
Florian,
me some hope.
yeah, Florian could keep going. I'm the
Give me
same
some
way though.
hope.
I'm always worried with Kohan Luke. The bird's name. I'm worried that he's going to stop. So I continue to rotate hens in with him so I can kind of feel out what's working. But like you, I move the eggs under pairs that are super breeders or, that have, bred good pigeons, I should say. But letting him raise babies, I think might add too much stress at his age. And I'm worried that something could happen at this point and it's just not worth it. But
It sounds like you and I very similar, but thanks for giving me the hope. It sounds like I got 4 more years out of
yeah.
Florida.
Yeah, so hopefully so. And what's Florian's background? Have you
So,
dove into some of the history on him?
yeah. So he's on this top side, it's Harry. So he's down from Jan Human's Harry, inbred. And then on the bottom side, he's inbred Verkerk, which, Verkerk Olympic Salon stuff. So Verkerk hen, Human's cock. Florian Hendricks got him. One thing about Florian is like we talk about, Florian is an extremely hard grader. Now, the sire of Florian didn't fill many eggs. I think Florian told me he only filled 2 eggs, and I got one of them.
Oh, wow.
And so he said he gave him back to Jan Humans, and I think he got a replacement. The dam somebody heard about. I think I don't know the exact story, but I think I don't think she got sold. So Florian, I think, would love to have replicated my Florian. Florian Hendricks would have loved to have replicated my Florian. But the cock was mostly infertile and the hen he sold. So he's kind of one of a kind, but he's that super Verkerk family of pigeons on the bottom side and the Harry Humans on the top. So certainly some proven racers in there, and it clicked.
That's awesome. Yeah, I went to the Netherlands in 22 and got to handle some of the Hoyman's birds down from Harry, and they have Harry there on display in a box, and it's a cool experience. But some of the super birds in the hand, and no wonder that
Yeah.
line is pretty super. I'm incorporating it into my loft now this year for the first time, some Harry blood. So
Yeah, that's great. I think again, I think it was one of the more predominant birds of. I mean, he's not the cannibal or some of these other really super pigeons or Klein Dirk, but he's well. Actually, both of those pigeons are actually in.
yeah, in the back, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, they're not of that legendary status yet, but certainly an amazing pigeon.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing about special birds like that because, as we already mentioned, it's rare to get them, and when you find them, you have to treat them as you have, like gold, and take the best care of them possible. And building around that certainly is a good way to have success. Do you have any children of Florian that are uh, kind of his replacement in the future that you really
I've
like?
got Yeah, I've got one on 1152, a dark check cock, who's just a super young breeder, and he is not probably he is the best breeding son that I've got of Florian and the Arden too. I got a couple of them that a couple others that have bred pretty well. I mean, they're not part of they're not the Florian's level. Part of it is I haven't given them the shot yet. You know, I mean, they're Florian. He gets the best hens. You know, he gets these guys are still proving themselves, and they're proving themselves quite well. First drop birds, big money winners. I've got a couple hens that have been super off of him. Turbulence, 2015 hen. She was the one that flew in the coast to coast and the futurity races in the Central Jersey Concourse. Amazing racing hen and has been an amazing producer for me. Splendiferous, just an absolute. It was an inbred. That was Florian made it to his daughter. His daughter was one of the top pigeons in the AIC race. I made them together. Got Splendiferous. She raced in Mark Morton's Pacific Northwest race. One of the top racing hens there. Brought her back. She's probably the best, not probably, she is the best breeding child of Florian. She's been super. Now she's missing now. She only lays about one egg every 45 days. So, and she's a 2016, but I find those inbred pigeons, I don't know if you found this, Jeff, some of those inbred pigeons at times, they'll go infertile or stop laying a little earlier than non-inbred pigeons, at least my experience. So she's probably about done. I got a couple youngsters off of her this year. And I got Josie, she was one of the top pigeons in the California Classic in 2018. She's bred super for me. So I got plenty of them around. But you know, yeah, so I think I got the next generation. I don't know if they're going to be the next Florian. How's that?
Yeah, that makes sense. And like we said, that's hard to find that. So
Yeah,
you've done inbreeding and sent them out and done really well that way too.
I know I'm a little bit nuts.
No, I'm happy to hear that because I personally I haven't had as much luck. I've had some luck with line breeding, but you know, something that close I haven't quite had any luck with. And I was going to ask you if you did crosses or line bred or inbred, how you went about it. And
If you look
that's
at
pretty
my
interesting.
pedigrees, I'm a heavy inbreeder, line breeder. I mean, I will send out a father-daughter, mother-son bird to a race. And here's what I found, right or wrong. One, I don't think the percentage is much worse than a normal pair. People are always like, oh, they can't race. I think if you look at the data, at least in the birds that I have, they will the inbred youngsters will fly just as well as the non-inbred youngsters as a percentage. You'll get a couple good ones and many average ones or many poor ones. But when you find that good inbred youngster that flies well, I have found when I bring them back to the breeding loft, they are typically gold.
Yeah.
That's what I found. So if I can get a good young inbred youngster to fly and then I bring it back and put them in the breeding loft, they are usually really special. Not always, but a higher percentage really special.
Yeah. And a pedigree like that, they're going to be very prepotent and
Yeah.
have that to be able to pass on. And they already have shown they have hybrid vigor to race. And as you said, if you only get one or two of them, that's all you need, right? And
Yeah.
like you said, you
Yeah.
bring them back. My dad is very big on uncle niece and first cousin matings. So a lot of our birds, the best birds, have been that over the years. And so, like you, I've had to bring in other lines to cross out to continue the things forward. But I have never sent out a father-daughter or mother-son mating out. But that's interesting.
Yeah, I've done it,
Something to try.
and I've had some good success with it. I mean, the DeBacher cock, I mentioned him earlier, one of my second best breeders. He's a full brother, full sister mating. I bought him from Chris DeBacher, and he's been super. Now I've actually mated him to so his sire is a son of Staff and Rusty. His mother is a daughter of Staff and Rusty, and I've mated him to the DeBacher hen who is off of Staff and Wendelina. So, I mean, the Staff cock, who's one of the super sons of Nick for Chris DeBacher, I've just found, okay, I can keep them concentrated and inbred. In fact, that first ace pigeon in the blue bucket was inbred down from the DeBacher. So again, I've had success with it.
Yeah.
So, and I anticipate that she's going to be a great breeder in the breeder loft. So we'll see.
Yeah,
She doesn't
that's
handle
great.
well. She doesn't handle well, as I said.
Right.
She raced well. I think she's got a good shot.
Do you have a proudest accomplishment in racing? Maybe it's something you watched in person at a one loft, or maybe it's back when you're flying club level, or is there something that sticks out to you? Maybe a couple stories or something that, was really you think about it to this day.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I heard you ask that at everyone, so I actually thought, what am I going to answer to Jeff when you asked me the question? And I'm going to answer that with three things. Well, four things. First thing is in 2000, or excuse me, in 1983, I started racing in 82. I didn't win any races in young bird. In 1983, in old birds, I was racing, and we had a yearling special in our club. It was a separate release. It was, people put yearlings in, you put $5 in. And so it was my first real money race as a young man. So I can still remember it was a really tough day. It was a 400-mile race, which 400 miles is my absolute favorite over distance. And so it was a tough day. The A birds were home, the B birds were home, and they released the yearling special after those two releases. And nobody in the club had any birds. And I was out there shooting hoop on our basketball standard. I could see my loft, and all of a sudden I see three birds drop in, blue check, blue bar, and a silver, 2275, 2201, and 2202. And I got first, second, and third. And I remember calling the president, and I said, "Hey, look, I just got some yearling special birds." He goes, "No, you didn't." He goes, "Those must be A birds or B birds." And we had a really good club president, but he was a little bit grouchy and very competitive. He's like, "Joe, you didn't. What color were the counter marks?" This is back when you had the counter marks.
Right. Yeah.
And I can still remember they were purple. I said, "They were purple counter marks." He goes, "No, they weren't." And he said, "Well, we'll check when we bring your clock." I know he didn't believe me until we got there, opened the clock, and there were three purple counter marks, first, second, and third in the yearling special. I mean, I still get emotional thinking about those three birds coming on the drop on that tough day. And that was just cool. And I think it was as much luck as anything, because I was still a new flyer making more mistakes. But that's probably my single most special memory of pigeon racing. Part is because I was new, young, and it was in a special race. It was a money race. I can remember coming home and showing my mom and dad, like the $75 or whatever that I'd won. And I was just so thrilled. So that was cool. The next thing is I remember like that South Africa race when that bird came in on a really tough day, 32nd, both in the averages. That was just cool. I was competing against the best in the world and the biggest race in the world at the time. No, I didn't win, but I think I sent 5 birds, and it was like, wow, that was just cool. Then last year, not last year, 2 years ago, 2022, I had 7 birds, first drop birds, in the one-loft races. I don't know if that's ever been done. I don't know if I'll ever do it again. That was pretty shocking to me. So that was an amazing year. So from a one-loft racing competitive standpoint, that was just incredible.
Yeah,
and then
incredible.
Next year, I had first ace pigeon in the blue bucket and first ace pigeon in the Crooked River, and first team birds in the Florida, and then had a first drop bird in the California Classic. That was pretty special. 2 first ace pigeons, and then first team award in the biggest race in the U.S. in the Florida Derby.
Yeah.
So those are all becoming kind of blending together, just some really fun success. So yeah, I don't know. I hope those are the things that, from a competitive standpoint, you want to win, and those are wins, and those are huge.
That's awesome. No, those are great. I'm glad you were able to share something from the beginning and then current too. That's great.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about percentages. Do you apply analytics to your system of what you're doing data wise?
Data drives all my decisions. So I say that. Emotion still at times drives a little bit of it. This is my favorite. There's a little bit of emotion that comes in, but I really try to use data to drive my decisions. You know what I mean? It's like we all have these favorite pigeons, and then you start looking at the results, and it's like, man, they're just not producing. I thought this pair was going to be amazing. Well, after a couple of years, it's like they're not amazing, and you need to move on from them. So I try to use the data to drive those decisions away from the emotion, but emotion always trickles in there a little bit. But I really try to use data to drive my decisions. I track the breeders, I track the results. One other key thing here is I track meaningful results to me. People will be like, "Oh, this bird was on the drop at 100 miles." I'm like, "Okay, congratulations, but that's not a meaningful result to me. This bird was on the drop at 200 miles. Okay, how fast was it? Was there 100 birds on the drop?" You got to ask the next question, right? So I really try to understand the data and ask the next question behind the data to make sure that the data is supporting that conclusion. So I really dig into the results, probably too much at times when I travel a lot with work. When I'm in hotels or on flights, I'm constantly looking at the results. Okay, yeah, that guy won the race, but it was a 2,000 yard per minute race with 80 birds home within a minute. How did you differentiate the quality of the pigeons? And I'm not saying they're not super, but I just don't know how to differentiate the quality of the pigeons.
Sorry, my dogs were about to start barking.
No problem. We've all been there.
Yeah. Uh, no, Ken Easley was talking about that, how he takes stacks of notes and continues to, study, and I do the same, where I'm constantly collecting data, trying to figure out what's working. And you send birds out, you want to know how they're doing, and let that impact how you're breeding, and making those minor adjustments you have to make every year. And if you're not doing that, you're going to definitely be behind guys like you and Ken that are doing those things.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, you got to use data to drive decisions. And I think again, take the emotion out of it, and take, in many respects, take what you paid for the bird out of it, take the pedigree out of it. At the end of the day, what results has it provided? And that's where you need to base your decision. So that's exactly right.
And do you try before, if you have a mating that doesn't quite work, maybe you acquired a new bird and you bring it in and it doesn't quite work out, do you try to switch mates before you make any harsh decision on, this isn't working?
Maybe. One of the things that I find when I bring in a new bird, I usually mate it to some of my proven pigeons, right? So I may bring in a new hen that I'm really excited about, and I'll put her right with Florian. And if she's not producing with Florian, then she's probably
Something's
gone.
wrong.
1
Yeah,
year.
something's wrong. Yeah,
Yeah, so probably 1 year. Again, maybe if I gave her somebody else, she may produce. But the thing with me is I don't have time to keep
sure,
trying.
sure.
And so if a pigeon hasn't, now if I mated it to a pigeon that's also a tester that's unproven, I'll typically give them another year. But if I mate a new pigeon to something that I know is quality and I'm finding success in my loft and I'm not getting anything, they're probably eliminated. And I know for a fact I've eliminated good pigeons that way. I know for a fact, because I'll give a youngster off that pair to somebody, and then I find out, oh man, it bred 6 ace pigeons for this guy or
Right.
whatever. It's like, oh, I should have kept it. But I also know I'm 100% eliminating the bad ones, And so
Yeah,
I think it's as important to find the bad ones as fast as you can as it is to find the
sure.
good ones that are producing. And so I'm a little more aggressive maybe than some other people, but that's just what works for me. And I'm no more than two if they're not producing. And if I made them to one of my best birds, they could be gone after 1 year.
Yeah, and I think, by sending it out to somebody and them producing 6 winners or 6 ace pigeons, like you said, that is data as well for you. Had you kept
Yeah,
that bird, you may not have had time to discover that. So
yeah,
that gives you data by sending it out. So that's also just as positive to the data, right?
absolutely, for sure. Yep.
Um, do you think one loft racing is in a good place, especially here in the States, I guess internationally as well with some of these big races? Do you like the state of one loft racing? Is there anything you'd like to see change or maybe can do better?
Um, I think one-off racing is incredibly in a good spot. I mean, I think you look at the numbers, you look at the money. Again, a lot of it's driven by the money. You look at the number of participants. Everything seems to be trending the right way, and I think there's a good reason for that, especially in the U.S. I think we have a lot of really good races in the U.S. I really do. I think we have some of the best in the world. I actually think some of the U.S., if not most of the U.S. one-loft managers, are probably some of the best one-loft managers in the world. And I also think that the models that we put together in the U.S. around the rules are very, very competitive. I like different rules. You've got some that no perch fee. I know there's been some resistance to that, but if it works, it works. You
Right.
let some charge a higher perch fee, and a portion of that goes to the entry fees. You charge like the Hoosier. I mean, they don't really charge a perch or entry fee. Theirs is a pool of money that goes in. And then hopefully at the end of the day, they do a good job. They have enough birds go to the race. They can pay out their prize money and put enough money in their pocket to make it a worthwhile business venture. I think the one loft in the U.S. is in actually a really good spot. I think you're going to continue to see weeding out of those that aren't as good or aren't quite as honorable as they need to be. There's a lot of money involved, and with a lot of money can become those that aren't quite treating it the way that they should and giving that fiduciary duty to the breeders that are entrusting with their money. But overall, I think the one loft racing in the U.S. is a great. The international races, it's not. I enter a few of them. It's a whole different model. I don't like how I don't like they don't pay on the draw. I like first drop payment. I think it's fair after 350 or 370 miles. 1 second separates first and second. To me, I don't like that principle. I also think that some of them are too tough. I think they send 6,000 birds and only 250 come on the day. To me,
Yeah. Something's wrong.
that's not my kind of race.
Right.
It's just not my kind of race. So I like to see good returns, competitive speeds. And I think the U.S. offers those tremendously.
Yeah.
I think it's in a good spot. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it does. Yeah, I agree. And, I think you're seeing some of these one lofts adding sprint categories, trying to,
Yeah,
because everybody has different kind of pigeons. Some people like the sprint, some people like, the middle distance. So the longer races. I'm excited to continue to see how things develop. I'm a big fan of 500, 600-mile races, and you just can't get that in one loss right now. So I'm hoping eventually there may be some way for that to happen. But
I think you're going to see it evolve. And people say the one-loft races are the future of the sport. I actually disagree with that. I think one-loft races are part of the evolution of the sport. I don't think club racing is going to go anywhere.
yeah,
I think it's going to continue to get refined. I think one-loft racing is going to be refined. I think you're going to see more overlap at times between breeders that do both. So that's my take. I don't think those are mutually exclusive, and that I
sure,
don't think you're going to see one succeed and the other fail. I think you're going to need both of them to have a healthy pigeon sport. That's
yeah,
my take, at least.
that makes sense. Um, when things do finally slow down for you and you're able to spend more time with the birds, do you ever see yourself back in the club racing, or are you happy?
Oh, absolutely, no question. No, in
Yeah,
fact, I went to our club basketing last Friday night. I went to a friend's house and watched the birds come in on Saturday last week. I'm trying to stay in contact. You know, my business, I'm very fortunate and blessed that some of the businesses we've been involved in, it may get sold in the next year or two or three. I don't know. You know, that happens, and then I'll, you know, we'll see what that doors that opens. But
that's great.
my wife's already well aware that once that transition happens, where I'm not traveling quite as much, that local club racing is in my future. I miss it. I'm not gonna lie. I just miss
Yeah.
it, and it's the big hole in my pigeon racing passion right now is that local club racing.
This has been an awesome interview. I know it's we're pushing time here. I could talk pigeons with you all day. This is a lot of fun.
Well, I
Let's
love it too. Thanks, Jeff.
let's talk. Last question for you. Advice to a new flyer. We talked about people who are coming back that have experienced pigeons and what you did. What about brand new guys? What tips can you give to the brand new guys that are watching?
I touched on it earlier, and again, I know you ask this question every time, and I'll say the same thing that we touched on earlier. Pick what your goal is. What are you hoping to accomplish? I mean, is your goal to win and have an affordable route? Is your goal to become famous and make money and sell pigeons? And then that's going to be a little different route. Is your goal just to love pigeons and you really enjoy the sport? When I first started, as I said, I just loved having birds. And so I think somebody who's just getting into the sport should say that Stephen R. Covey, one of the great business books, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, said, always begin with the end in mind. I think if you're going to get in, what is your goal, and set that goal, and then make sure and align with that. And I think you'll find success. If you want to win, there's multiple paths to win. If you want to find fame and fortune and do it, there's multiple paths to do that. But pick your goal and do it. I will say, don't spend too much money, because I think when you spend too much money and invest too much in something that doesn't quite meet your goals initially, very quickly you get frustrated and may want to quit.
Yeah.
But that's so I think initially just do a ton of research too. That's another thing. I would spend so much time researching, reading pigeon books, going and hanging out with guys on race day and learning what a pigeon handles like. Don't spend too much time staring at pedigrees and dreaming about famous names and brands. Just really get in and go clean a guy's loft in return for advice.
Yeah.
I was so fortunate to have some really good mentors when I started in the sport. My dad had been out too long. He kind of forgotten what pigeon racing was all about, but I had some really good mentors. Find some mentors, invest in building a relationship with them, pick your goal, and then just do a ton of research. And I think you can find great joy in this sport.
That's awesome advice. That's one of the fun things Yellow Rogier's talked about, is he started out cleaning lofts, and that's where he began, cleaning the lofts of the Hubins, and look where he is today with what all the success he's had. So I think
He's
that's
right
great
at the top.
advice. Yeah.
He's right at the top. Well, thanks, Jeff.
All right, Joe, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you and your pigeons? Do you have a website or Facebook or?
I'm on Facebook, and so just personal message me. I'll give you my phone number. I'm willing to talk and text and message. I mean, I say that carefully, because, and I love to talk pigeons, but I also have responsibilities with work, family, and community, and so be respectful of that.
Right.
But I also offer as much advice and perspective as I can. But Facebook would probably be the best. I'm happy to give my number. If you want me to, I'll give it right now.
Sure.
801-358-5094. 801-358-5094. Shoot me a text before you call. And then I'll let you know a good time to call. But no, I love to help the sport. I want to give back as much as I can. And that means time and advice. And I'll give as much as I can. take it or leave it. That's the one thing I always tell people. Don't just say because Joe said it, it's good advice. It could be the dumbest advice in your world. Just disregard it. But at least let's talk if you want to get some perspective.
And yeah, guys, do it respectfully on the time that you have available. And this has been an awesome interview. People are going to learn a lot from this, and can't thank you enough for coming on, Joe and Joe Nemelka. And let's do it again here soon, and keep talking about pigeons. This has been a lot of fun, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jeff. Honestly, I just gratitude for you for what you bring into the sport, and grateful that you reached out and made this happen. So I'm very honored. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.